The smell of old cedar and something faintly metallic like forgotten pennies always clung to Grandma Elura's attic. It was a comforting scent, usually. Today, though, it felt suffocating, pressing down on my chest like the weight of the last 4 decades. I was 43, Vincent Winters, an electrician who spent his life fixing other people's short circuits, yet I couldn't fix the gaping hole left by my grandmother's passing. She was the only person who ever looked at me and saw possibility, not just potential for disappointment. The funeral had been 3 weeks ago. My mother, Eleanor, had managed to make even that solemn occasion about herself, sighing dramatically every time someone mentioned Elara's generosity. Mom and Grandma had always had a strained relationship, a Cold War fought with passive-aggressive comments and carefully chosen silences. I was off in the neutral territory, the battlefield they occasionally shared. I sat on a dusty trunk, the last of Elara's possessions boxed up around me, waiting for the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, to arrive with the final papers. He was running late, which gave my internal monologue plenty of time to run wild. I ran a calloused hand over the rough-hewn wood of the trunk. I remembered being 7, hiding inside this very trunk during a fierce summer storm, Grandma reading me stories by flashlight, her voice a low, steady hum against the thunder. Those memories were precious, untainted by the usual family drama. If you've reached the end of this story, please consider subscribing to the channel, leaving a like, and sharing in the comments where you're watching from. Your engagement genuinely helps the channel grow and allows us to bring you more powerful stories. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback truly shapes future episodes. My mother, Eleanor, always treated me like an inconvenience, a necessary evil. She never missed an opportunity to remind me of my shortcomings, often prefacing her critiques with a sigh that suggested my existence was a burden she heroically bore. "Vincent, you're so clumsy. Honestly, sometimes I wonder how you even manage to tie your own shoes." Or, more recently, a residential electrician. "That's nice, dear. But your cousin Michael is a partner at his law firm now. Such a shame you never aimed higher." It was the constant, low-level hum of disapproval that defined our relationship. I had learned to internalize it, accepting that I was simply not enough. I was practical, reliable, but never brilliant, never the son she truly wanted. A sudden sharp pain in my hand made me pull it back. I'd snagged my skin on a loose nail protruding from the trunk. A tiny bead of blood welled up. I frowned, pulling out my multi-tool, always prepared to hammer the nail back in. As I did, the force of the hammer blow shifted something inside the trunk, a subtle, hollow sound that didn't match the solid thud of the stored blankets. Curiosity, the electrician's curse, took over. I knelt, examining the interior. The lining, a faded floral chintz, seemed slightly loose near the bottom corner. I peeled back the fabric carefully, revealing a small, shallow compartment hidden beneath the false bottom. My heart gave a strange, unexpected lurch. It was the kind of secret space a child might make. Yet it held something clearly intended for an adult. A thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with a wax stamp bearing Elara's distinctive, elegant initial, E. My name, Vincent, was written across the front in her familiar looping script. It wasn't addressed to Vincent Winters. It was simply Vincent. Intimate. Personal. I hesitated, the envelope cool and heavy in my hand. This felt like stepping into a private conversation, a moment stolen from time. The attic was silent now, the dust motes dancing in the single shaft of sunlight slicing through the small window. I could hear the distant, impatient sound of a car horn from the street below. Mr. Henderson must have arrived. I quickly tucked the letter inside the inner pocket of my worn leather jacket, smoothing the fabric over it. I needed to read this alone, without the judging eyes of my mother or the sterile presence of the lawyer. I descended the steep, creaking attic stairs, the smell of lemon polish and stale air growing stronger as I reached the second floor. Eleanor was already in the living room, perched on the edge of a velvet armchair, looking impeccably groomed and utterly impatient. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, her expression a mask of weary martyrdom. "Vincent, finally. Mr. Henderson has been waiting for 5 minutes," she chastised, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Honestly, you couldn't be on time even for your own grandmother's will reading." I ignored the jab. "Sorry, Mom. Just finishing up in the attic." Mr. Henderson, a man whose suit looked perpetually too tight, offered a weak smile. He opened his briefcase, the leather squeaking in the tense silence. He read the standard legal preamble, the language cold and impersonal, detailing the distribution of assets: the house, the small portfolio of stocks, the antique jewelry. Everything was divided equally between Eleanor and me, exactly as expected. I felt a familiar pang of disappointment, not for the money, but for the lack of a final, personal word from Alara. Then Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. "And finally, Mrs. Winters, Mr. Winters, there is a specific addendum. A personal note, if you will, addressed to Vincent." Eleanor's perfectly sculpted eyebrow twitched. "A note? What kind of note?" Her tone suggested that any communication directed solely at me was inherently suspicious. Mr. Henderson produced a second, smaller envelope, this one plain white, sealed with tape. "It's simply a letter, Eleanor." Alara insisted it be read aloud after the formal proceedings. He handed it to me. I opened it slowly, the cheap paper rustling. It was short, written in Alara's hand, but this script was shaky, weaker than the one on the hidden letter. "My dearest Vincent, I know you always felt like you didn't quite belong. Please know that you were always, always wanted. There are things you need to understand about your past, truths that were never meant to stay buried. I tried to tell you, but I ran out of time. The key is in the place where we shared our secrets. Look deeper, my brave boy. Find the truth. Love, Grandma." The room fell silent. Eleanor stared at me, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin, white line. The air thickened with unspoken accusation. "Secrets? What utter nonsense is this?" Eleanor finally spat, her composure cracking. Alara was always so dramatic, always trying to create some kind of theatrical mystery. She stood up, smoothing her skirt with agitated movements. "Vincent, what did she mean by you didn't belong? You are my son. That's all there is to it." I looked down at the letter, the words echoing in my mind. "The key is in the place we shared our secrets." I knew exactly what she meant. The cedar trunk. The hidden compartment. The letter in my jacket pocket suddenly felt like a burning coal against my skin. I needed to leave. I don't know, Mom," I managed, feigning confusion. "Maybe she was just being sentimental. You know how she was." Eleanor didn't look convinced. Her eyes narrowed, scrutinizing my face. "You look like you know something, Vincent. Did she tell you things? Did she fill your head with her ridiculous conspiracy theories?" "No, Mom, I promise." The lie tasted like ash. I stood up quickly. "I need some air. I'll call you later, Mr. Henderson." I practically fled the house, the small white letter clutched in my hand. As I reached my truck, I could feel Eleanor's gaze boring into my back from the living room window. She thought she had dismissed the letter as mere sentimentality, but the fear in her eyes was palpable. She knew something. And now I had the key, both literally and figuratively, to unlock a truth she desperately wanted to keep hidden. I climbed into the driver's seat, the engine starting with a familiar rumble. I pulled the cream-colored envelope from my jacket. The wax seal, bearing the E, felt fragile under my thumb. This was it. The real message. I tore the seal. The paper inside was thick, heavy, and covered in Alara's strong, clear handwriting, the script steady, unlike the note read in the living room. She must have written this long ago. The first line hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. It wasn't a sentimental farewell. It was an accusation, a confession, and a warning, all wrapped into one devastating sentence. Asterisk Vincent, my brave boy, you must understand this. Eleanor is not your biological mother. The world outside my truck window, the familiar street, the neighbor's barking dog, the setting sun suddenly seemed distorted, unreal. The sentence repeated in my mind, a relentless, deafening echo. Asterisk Eleanor is not your biological mother. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my identity, the coldness of my upbringing, the constant feeling of being an outsider, it all shattered in that instant. I felt dizzy, my hands shaking so violently I had to grip the steering wheel to steady myself. I was 43 years old, and my entire life was a carefully constructed lie. This wasn't just a secret. This was the foundation of my existence crumbling beneath my feet. I forced myself to breathe, the air tasting thin and metallic. I had to read the rest. I had to understand the magnitude of this deception. The letter continued, detailing the history, the pain, the choices made decades ago. I know this is a terrible shock, Vincent. I should have told you sooner, but I was afraid of Eleanor's reaction, afraid of losing you completely. She was desperate for a child, truly broken after 3 miscarriages. When she finally brought you home, she insisted on absolute secrecy. You were adopted, Vincent, in an open adoption that quickly turned closed. Your mother, your birth mother, was a beautiful, struggling artist named Clara. She was only 18, and she loved you fiercely, but she knew she couldn't give you the life you deserved. She chose us, chose stability for you. Eleanor promised Clara she would always be a part of your life, even if only from a distance. But Eleanor broke that promise immediately. My head spun. Clara, an artist. Not the cold, critical woman who raised me. A wave of nausea washed over me, followed by a strange, exhilarating surge of understanding. The constant friction, the lack of natural affection, it wasn't just my fault. It was the fundamental disconnect of 2 strangers forced into a relationship under false pretenses. Eleanor didn't just dislike me. She resented the lie, and perhaps she resented the memory of Clara. The letter continued, the tone growing urgent. Asterisk Eleanor destroyed all the legal records, the adoption papers, everything that tied you to Clara. She cut off all contact. Clara tried to reach out when you were 5, sending a small, hand-painted wooden toy, a little blue bird. Eleanor intercepted it and told Clara to disappear, threatening legal action and worse. Clara was devastated. She wrote me letters, begging for updates. I kept them all, Vincent. I couldn't bear to destroy her memory. They are hidden, along with the original adoption decree, in the only place Eleanor never thought to look, the old workshop bench behind the bottom drawer. The workshop. My sanctuary, the place I retreated to whenever Eleanor's disapproval became too much. The bench was heavy, bolted to the concrete floor. I knew the drawers well, but I had never noticed anything behind the bottom one. Alara, ever the careful planner, had left a trail of breadcrumbs. Asterisk Clara never forgot you, my dear boy. She moved to the West Coast, pursuing her art, but she always asked about you. I believe she is still there. Find her, Vincent. She deserves to know the man you've become. And you deserve to know the woman who gave you life. Be careful. Eleanor will fight this. She will deny everything. She has too much invested in this lie. The final sentence was a chilling echo of my mother's own frequent, Cruel remarks, but now it carried a terrifying new context. Asterisk, she called you a mistake, Vincent. She said it to me years ago when she was angry. Not because she regretted adopting you, but because she regretted the complicated truth you represented. You are not a mistake. You are the bravest, kindest man I know. Go find your truth. I folded the letter, my hand steady now, fueled by a cold, hard resolve. The initial shock had given way to a fierce, protective anger. Anger for the young woman Clara, who is robbed of her son. Anger for Alara, who lived under the burden of this secret. And anger for myself for the 43 years spent believing I was fundamentally flawed, when the flaw was in the foundation of my life. I started the engine, pulling away from the curb. I wasn't going home. I was going straight to Alara's house, back to the workshop. I needed those letters. I needed proof before confronting Eleanor. I knew this confrontation wouldn't be a calm discussion. It would be a detonation. The drive back was a blur. Every memory of Eleanor, her cold touch, her dismissive words, the way she always seemed to flinch when I hugged her, was reinterpreted through the lens of adoption. It wasn't just a mother-son dynamic. It was a desperate, possessive woman trying to erase the ghost of another woman. I parked behind the house, slipping in through the back door. The workshop was in the detached garage, smelling of sawdust and oil. I moved quickly to the heavy, scarred workbench. I pulled out the bottom drawer, the wood sliding roughly on the runners. I tipped the drawer up, peering into the dark space behind it. Nothing obvious. I ran my fingers along the back panel, searching for a seam, a latch, anything. My fingers brushed against a small, almost invisible metal tab near the bottom edge. I pressed it. With a soft mechanical click, the back panel of the drawer cavity, not the drawer itself, but the cavity swung inward, revealing a deep, narrow space. Inside, wrapped in a thick, protective layer of plastic sheeting, were two bundles. The first was a stack of thin, airmail letters tied with faded blue ribbon. The second was a manila envelope, crisp and official-looking, stamped with a long-ago date. The adoption decree. Proof. I pulled the letters out, the ribbon disintegrating in my hands. The paper was fragile, smelling faintly of old perfume and desperation. I skimmed the first one, dated 38 years ago. Asterisk, Dear Alara, I saw a photo of him in the paper the school play. He looks so big. Does he ever ask about me? I worry Eleanor tells him terrible things. Please, just tell him I love him. Please. Asterisk, tears blurred my vision, a raw, aching grief for the lost connection. Clara's pain was palpable, seeping off the pages. Eleanor hadn't just broken a promise. She had committed an act of emotional cruelty, severing a bond that should have been nurtured. I tucked the letters and the decree into my jacket. I had the evidence. Now I needed to know where Clara was. Alara's letter mentioned the West Coast. That was too vague. I needed a name, a city. I scanned the remaining letters quickly, looking for a return address. Most were just postmarked with a city name, no street address, likely sent to a P.O. box Alara kept secret. Then, in the final letter, dated about 10 years ago, I found a clue. Asterisk, I'm moving my studio to Seattle next month. It's hard to leave San Francisco, but the light is better there. I'm showing at the Belltown Gallery in November. Wish me luck. Seattle. Belltown Gallery. A name, a location. Hope, sharp and terrifying, pierced through my anger. I had to find this gallery. I had to find Clara. I left the workshop, locking the door behind me. I knew Eleanor would be expecting me to call to discuss this sentimental note. I wouldn't call. I would go home, prepare, and then I would face her. I needed to be calm, armed with the truth, ready for the explosion. As I drove away, I checked my rearview mirror. A dark sedan was parked 2 houses down, lights off. It had been there when I arrived, and it was still there now. I dismissed it as a neighbor, but a cold knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Eleanor was many things, but subtle was not one of them. Had she already started watching me? Was she so afraid of the truth that she was monitoring my movements? I shook off the paranoia, focusing on the task ahead. I had a name, a city, and a lifetime of lies to dismantle. I spent the evening hunched over my laptop, searching for the Belltown Gallery in Seattle. It was still active. I looked up the current roster of artists. One name jumped out stark and undeniable: Clara Vance. The artist's name matched the first name in Alara's letter. I pulled up her portfolio. The work was vibrant, full of light and complex textures. Exactly the kind of passion I imagined in the young woman who gave me up. I clicked on her biography. Age 61. Based in Seattle. I looked at the small professional photo accompanying the bio. Her eyes, they were the same shape as mine, a distinct almond curve I'd always thought was unique to me. A sudden, overwhelming sense of recognition flooded me. This wasn't just a name on a page. This was a part of me I never knew existed. I closed the laptop. The image of Clara's face burned into my memory. Seattle was a 15-hour drive. I could leave tomorrow. I needed to tell Eleanor I was leaving, but I wouldn't tell her why. I needed to see her face when I mentioned the name Clara. The next morning, the house felt charged, the air thick with impending conflict. Eleanor was in the kitchen, sipping tea, reading the newspaper, a picture of serene normalcy. "Going somewhere, Vincent?" she asked, without looking up, noticing my packed duffel bag by the door. "Just a job, Mom. Emergency electrical work out of state." "A big commercial contract," I lied smoothly. I was good at lying to her. It was a survival skill honed over decades. She lowered the paper, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Out of state? That's unusual for you." "Where?" "Oregon." "Just for a few days." I kept my voice level, casual. She paused, a flicker of suspicion crossing her face. "You're not still dwelling on that ridiculous letter from Alara, are you? All that talk about secrets." It was just an old woman being dramatic. This was it. The moment of truth, or at least, the moment of testing her defenses. I walked closer to the kitchen counter, leaning in. "No, Mom, not dwelling." "But it did make me think about the past," I said, watching her closely. "Did Grandma ever mention anyone named Clara to you?" She wrote about an old friend. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. Eleanor dropped her teacup. It didn't shatter, but the hot liquid splashed across the pristine white tile floor. Her face went utterly blank, the color draining away until she looked like polished marble. Her hands trembled violently. "Clara?" she whispered, the name a ragged sound, full of buried fear. I don't know anyone named Clara. Alara had many friends, Vincent. Why would you ask me that?" She was scrambling, her usual composure utterly gone. I knew then, with absolute certainty, that Alara's letter was true. The lie was monumental, and Eleanor was terrified of its exposure. The fear in her eyes was a raw, visceral thing, confirming every word Alara had written. I felt a surge of cold triumph, quickly tempered by the deep sadness of realizing the depth of her deception. "No reason, Mom," I said, picking up the teacup, my own hand steady. "Just curiosity. I'll call you when I get to Oregon." I left quickly, before she could regain her composure, before she could start weaving new lies. I drove away, the image of her shattered face haunting me. I was heading toward my truth, but I knew, with chilling certainty, that Eleanor would not let me go without a fight. She had 43 years of denial invested in this. As I merged onto the highway, heading north toward Seattle, I checked my rearview mirror again. The dark sedan was 3 cars back, keeping pace. It wasn't paranoia. I was being followed. The stakes had just escalated from a painful family secret to a dangerous game of cat and mouse. Eleanor was watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. She had called me a mistake once, but now I was her biggest threat. I gripped the steering wheel, the leather warm beneath my palms. I was going to find Clara, and I was going to expose the truth, no matter the cost. The drive was long, tedious, and filled with the ghosts of my past. I kept the radio low, preferring the silence that allowed me to sift through the memories. Every interaction with Eleanor, every subtle slight, now clicked into place like a complex, horrifying puzzle. The time I won the 4th grade science fair, and she just nodded, saying, "Well, you certainly put in the hours." No genuine pride, just acknowledgement of effort. It wasn't just her personality. It was the fundamental lack of maternal bond, the resentment of a woman who felt she had been forced to raise another woman's child. I stopped for gas just south of Portland, the air damp and smelling of pine. I watched the dark sedan pull in across the street, the driver staying inside, obscured by tinted windows. It was definitely surveillance. Eleanor wasn't just worried. She was actively trying to control the narrative. This wasn't just about protecting her reputation. It was about protecting the very structure of her life, which was built on this deception. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? My mother is following me because she lied about my adoption 43 years ago? I needed proof of her intent, not just proof of the lie. I decided to play it smart. I pulled off the highway at the next major exit, driving through a maze of suburban streets, making random turns, circling back. After 20 minutes of this erratic driving, I pulled into a crowded supermarket parking lot, quickly backed into a spot, and waited. 5 minutes later, the dark sedan drove slowly past the entrance, clearly searching. I watched it disappear down the main road. They had lost me. For now. I felt a rush of adrenaline. I wasn't just a passive victim of a family drama anymore. I was an active participant, fighting for my own history. I pulled out my phone and called the Belltown Gallery. A bright, professional voice answered. "Belltown Gallery, how may I help you?" "Yes, I'm calling about the artist, Clara Vance," I said, trying to sound like a potential buyer. "I'm interested in her work. Do you know if she's in the city this week?" "Oh, Clara is a wonderful artist. She's actually preparing for a major retrospective next month. She's in her studio, working feverishly. We can certainly arrange a viewing of her current pieces if you'd like." "That would be excellent," I said. "Could you possibly give me the address of her studio? I'm only in town for a short time, and I'd prefer it to go directly there." The woman hesitated. "We don't usually give out the artist's private studio addresses, sir. But I can take your number and have her manager call you." "Please, this is rather urgent," I pressed, improvising quickly. "I'm a representative for a major collector in New York. We're looking to acquire several pieces for a private exhibition. I understand she's working on a series involving bluebirds?" I held my breath. The bluebird the toy Eleanor intercepted. It was a long shot, but if that motif was significant to Clara, it might be the key. A pause. "Well, that's surprisingly specific," the woman chuckled. "Yes, she has a very personal series called The Unflown. It's quite stunning." "All right, I'll make an exception. Her studio is located in the old Pioneer Square district on First Avenue. Number 1408. It's an industrial building, top floor." She gave me the cross street and hung up. I had the address. Pioneer Square. The old brick buildings, the smell of salt air and history. It felt right. I checked the time. It was late afternoon. I decided to find a cheap motel outside the city center first, settle in, and then approach Clara tomorrow morning. I needed to be rested and clear-headed for what would undoubtedly be the most important conversation of my life. I found a basic no-frills motel near the airport. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. I didn't care. I needed anonymity. I pulled out the manila envelope, the adoption decree. I needed to see the names in black and white. Asterisk adopting parents, Eleanor and Robert Winters. Biological mother, Clara Vance. My birth name was listed as Vincent Vance. My father's name was blank. I sat on the edge of the bed, the paper shaking slightly in my hand. Vincent Vance. It felt like putting on a jacket that finally fit. The name Winters had always felt heavy, borrowed. I pulled out the stack of letters from Clara to Alara. They spanned years, detailing her life, her struggles, her successes, and always her longing for me. In one letter, she described the day she gave me up, the agonizing choice, the promise Eleanor made. Asterisk, she looked me in the eye, Alara, and promised I could send him a birthday card every year. Just one card. And she took that away too. I read until the cheap motel lamp hurt my eyes. Clara wasn't just an artist. She was a woman who carried the profound grief of a mother separated from her child. And Eleanor had orchestrated that separation, weaponizing her own pain and privilege. I finally drifted into a fitful sleep, waking several times. The image of Eleanor's terrified face superimposed over Clara's gentle, artistic one. The next morning, I drove into Seattle. Pioneer Square was a mix of historic architecture and modern bustle. I found the building easily a massive red brick structure with fire escapes crisscrossing the front. The lobby was industrial, concrete floors, exposed pipes. I took the ancient freight elevator to the top floor. Stepping out, the air was immediately different. It smelled of turpentine, oil paint, and creativity. The hallway was lined with large wooden doors. I found 1408. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. I stood there for a full minute, rehearsing my opening line. Asterisk, hello, my name is Vincent. I think you might be my mother. It sounded ridiculous, melodramatic. I took a deep breath and knocked, a firm electrician's knock. The door opened almost immediately. Standing there was Clara Vance. She was exactly as in the photo, but softer, framed by a halo of silver-streaked brown hair pulled back loosely. She was wearing paint-splattered overalls and looked utterly focused. Yes, can I help you? Her voice was low, melodic, and carried a slight, unexpected lilt. I swallowed, the rehearsed lines vanishing. Ms. Vance? My name is Vincent Winters. She frowned slightly, her eyes, my eyes, assessing me. I don't believe we have an appointment. Are you from the gallery? I knew I couldn't ease into this. I had to plunge straight in. I reached into my jacket, not for the adoption papers, but for the most personal piece of evidence I had. I pulled out the small, faded photograph I had found tucked inside one of Alara's old address books, a picture of a young Alara holding a tiny baby wrapped in a blue blanket. On the back, Alara had written, Vincent, 1980. I held it out. I'm not from the gallery, Clara. I'm Alara Winters' grandson. And I think I'm the baby in this picture. Clara took the photo, her hand trembling. She looked down at the image, then up at my face. Her professional demeanor evaporated, replaced by a devastating mix of shock, fear, and overwhelming recognition. Her breath hitched, a sharp, ragged sound. She didn't need to see the papers. She saw the truth in my eyes, in the shape of my jaw, in the familiar curve of my mouth. Alara, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She finally told you. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She just stared, absorbing 43 years of absence in one agonizing glance. She wrote me a letter, I confirmed, my voice thick. She told me about the adoption, about Eleanor, about the blue bird. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. The blue bird, she repeated, the memory clearly painful. She kept it. Elara kept it. She stepped back, swinging the heavy door wide. Come in, Vincent, please, come in. The studio was enormous, filled with light and color. Canvases in various stages of completion were stacked everywhere. The air was heavy with the smell of linseed oil. I walked into the room, feeling like I was finally walking into my own skin. Clara closed the door, leaning against it, still clutching the photo. I never thought this day would come. I thought Eleanor had won. She almost did, I said, my voice steady now. She destroyed the records. She cut you off. She made me believe I was difficult, a burden. Clara's eyes flashed with a fierce, protective anger. Oh, Vincent, that woman. She was so consumed by her own grief, she couldn't see the beautiful gift she was given. I knew she was cold, but I didn't know she was cruel enough to erase me completely. She walked toward a large covered canvas in the center of the room. I painted you, you know, every year. Not your face, because I didn't know what you looked like, but the feeling of you. The missing piece. She pulled the sheet off the canvas. It was a stunning, abstract piece, dominated by shades of deep blue and gold. In the center, a single, perfect blue bird, wings outstretched, soaring toward the light. Leon Flown, she murmured. It was always about you. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing easily, naturally, filling in the vast, empty spaces of my life. She told me about her life, her art, the regret that never faded. I told her about Elara, my work as an electrician, my quiet, practical life. We found echoes of each other everywhere, a shared love for the smell of rain, a similar dry sense of humor, the same slightly crooked pinky finger. I tried so hard to find you, Clara confessed, her voice raw. I hired a private investigator 10 years ago, but Eleanor had covered her tracks too well. The investigator said he hit a dead end, that all the adoption records were sealed permanently. They weren't sealed, I corrected, pulling the manila envelope from my jacket. They were hidden. Elara kept them, along with your letters. I handed her the stack of airmail letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Clara took them, her fingers tracing the edges of the ribbon. She didn't open them immediately. My letters. All those years of hoping. She loved you, Clara, I said softly. She loved us both. She just couldn't stand up to Eleanor while she was alive. Clara looked at the letters, then back at me. Eleanor, she must be furious that you know. She is, I confirmed, recounting the scene in the kitchen, the panic, the denial. She's also having me followed. I shook the tail in Portland, but she's not going to stop. She has too much to lose. Clara frowned, her artistic focus giving way to a steely resolve. Followed? Vincent, this isn't just about hurt feelings. Eleanor's entire identity as a mother is wrapped up in this lie. If the truth comes out, she loses everything, her friends, her standing, her carefully constructed life. I know, I said, but I have to expose it. Not just for me, but for you. You deserve to be acknowledged. And Eleanor needs to face the consequences of her cruelty. Clara nodded slowly. You're right. But we need to be smart. If she's resorting to surveillance, she might resort to anything to protect her secret. We need a plan. We need to make the truth undeniable, public, and fast. I looked around the studio at the vibrant, fearless art. You have a retrospective coming up. That's a public platform. Clara's eyes lit up. Yes, the opening is in 3 weeks. It will be covered by the City Arts Press. All my collectors will be there. We use the retrospective, I said, the plan forming rapidly. We make the unflown the centerpiece. And we don't just tell the story. We show the evidence, the letters, the decree. We force her hand in a public forum where she can't simply deny it or destroy the proof. Clara walked over to a small, antique desk and pulled out a sleek, modern phone. I need to call my manager. We need to adjust the catalog description, the press release. We're going to tell the world the story of the blue bird. As we worked, the atmosphere shifted from emotional reunion to strategic planning. We were two people, separated by a lie, now united by a shared purpose. We were going to dismantle Eleanor's reality piece by piece. Suddenly, a loud, insistent knocking echoed from the studio door. It wasn't the tentative knock of a gallery assistant. It was a heavy, demanding sound. Clara and I froze, exchanging a look of immediate alarm. "Did you tell anyone you were coming here?" Clara whispered, her hand instinctively reaching for the phone. "No one," I confirmed, my heart pounding. "I lost the tail hours ago." The knocking came again, louder this time, followed by a man's deep, authoritative voice. "Ms. Vance? We know Mr. Winters is in there. We need to speak with him. This is a matter of urgent family business." Eleanor hadn't just sent a tail. She had sent an enforcer. And they had found me. The confrontation I had planned for the future was happening right now in Clara's sanctuary. I looked at Clara, my newfound mother, her face etched with fear but also a fierce determination. "Don't open the door," I instructed, moving toward the heavy door, listening intently. She must have tracked my phone or my credit card usage. "They're trying to intimidate us." I pressed my ear to the cold wood. The man outside knocked again, harder, rattling the frame. "Mr. Winters, don't make this difficult. Eleanor is very concerned about your sudden disappearance." "Concerned?" I muttered, the irony bitter. "She's worried I'll talk." Clara grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Vincent, we can't let them take the evidence. If they get those letters and the decree, we lose our leverage." I looked around the studio. The windows were too high, too far to jump. The only way out was the door. I had to buy us time. "Who are you?" I shouted through the door, projecting confidence I didn't entirely feel. "I'm not leaving." "Call the police if you have a legal reason to be here." The man outside scoffed. "No need for the police, Mr. Winters. We just want to ensure you're safe and that you haven't been misled by sentimental nonsense." The phrase sentimental nonsense was a direct echo of Eleanor's dismissal of Alara's letter. This wasn't just a hired goon. This was someone acting directly on Eleanor's specific instructions. "I'm fine," I retorted. "And I'm not misled. I have the proof. The adoption decree, the letters from Clara. Eleanor's lie is over." A moment of silence followed my declaration. Then, the man outside spoke again, his voice lower, more menacing. "You don't understand the gravity of the situation, Vincent. You are interfering with a very powerful family. You need to come out now and hand over those documents, or we will take them." I heard a distinct scraping sound against the door, the sound of a tool being inserted into the lock. They weren't waiting for me to open it. They were breaking in. "They're picking the lock," I hissed to Clara. "We need to hide the evidence." Clara pointed to a large industrial metal cabinet used for storing chemicals and solvents. "In there." "It locks. Hurry." I shoved the manila envelope and the stack of letters into the cabinet, slamming the heavy door shut and twisting the small, built-in lock. It wasn't impenetrable, but it would slow them down. Just as I finished, the studio door burst inward with a sickening crack, splintering the frame. Two large men in dark suits stood in the doorway. They weren't police. They were hired muscle, their faces grim and professional. "Vincent Winters," the leader said, stepping into the room. He scanned the studio, his eyes immediately settling on me. "We're taking you home." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, stepping in front of Clara, shielding her. "And you have no legal authority here." The second man, silent and broader, advanced toward me. I was an electrician, used to physical labor, but these men were trained. I needed a distraction. My eyes swept the studio, landing on a shelf holding various solvents, turpentine, mineral spirits, and a can of acetone. "Clara, the fire extinguisher." I yelled. Clara, surprisingly quick, darted toward the corner where a bright red extinguisher was mounted. As the broad man lunged, I grabbed the can of mineral spirits and hurled it at the leader's chest. It didn't hurt him, but it soaked his suit, the strong chemical odor filling the air. "Get him," the leader roared, wiping the liquid from his face. The broad man reached for me, but I sidestepped, grabbing a heavy, plaster bust of Michelangelo off a pedestal and swinging it. It connected with the side of his head with a dull, sickening thud. He staggered back, momentarily stunned. "Now, Clara." Clara ripped the fire extinguisher from the wall mount and, with surprising force, aimed it at the leader. A cloud of white, choking chemical powder erupted, engulfing the man. He screamed, blinded and sputtering. I didn't wait. I grabbed Clara's hand. "The back exit, now!" We ran through a curtained doorway that led to a small utility room. Behind it was a narrow, steep staircase, a maintenance exit leading to the alley below. We scrambled down the steps, the sound of the men coughing and cursing echoing above us. We burst out into the damp, narrow alleyway, the smell of garbage and exhaust sharp in the air. I looked back up. The men weren't immediately following. They were likely still dealing with the extinguisher foam. "My car is parked 3 blocks over," I gasped, pulling Clara along. "We need to get out of the city." "No," Clara insisted, breathless but resolute. "We need to go to the gallery. We need to make the plan happen now. If Eleanor is sending thugs, she's desperate. Waiting 3 weeks is too dangerous." She was right. The element of surprise was our only advantage left. If we waited, Eleanor would find a way to discredit us or, worse, silence us. We ran, weaving through the crowded streets of Pioneer Square. We reached a busy intersection and hailed a cab. "Belltown Gallery, please." "And drive fast," I instructed the driver. As we sped away, I looked back. I saw the dark sedan, now joined by an unmarked black SUV, pulling out of the alley. They were closing in. "They're right behind us," I told Clara, my jaw tight. Clara, despite the terror, was surprisingly calm. She pulled out her phone and rapidly texted someone. "It's my manager, David. I told him we're coming, and we need the gallery opened immediately. We need the press." "The press isn't there yet," I pointed out. "We need a public spectacle." "We'll make one," Clara said, her eyes glinting with a newfound fierce resolve. "We need a public spectacle." "We'll make one," Clara said, her eyes glinting with a newfound fierce resolve. "We'll use my art. We'll use the truth. We'll make sure Eleanor's lie dies in the spotlight." The cab pulled up to the gallery, a sleek modern space with huge glass windows facing the street. David, a tall, impeccably dressed man in his early 30s, was already waiting, looking confused and stressed. "Clara, what on earth is going on? You look like you just escaped a fire." "Worse, David. We escaped Eleanor Winters," Clara said, pulling me inside. "Listen, we need to set up the Unflown immediately. Center stage. And I need you to call every journalist you know. Tell them Clara Vance has an urgent, Breaking story about her retrospective, a story that involves a major family secret and a 43-year-old lie. David, though clearly overwhelmed, saw the genuine fear and urgency in Clara's eyes. A family secret? Clara, this is highly unorthodox. It's necessary, I interjected, pulling the manila envelope and the letters from my jacket. This is the proof. We need to present this evidence publicly before Eleanor can destroy it. David looked at the official-looking papers, his professional skepticism warring with his curiosity. Adoption papers? What does this have to do with your art, Clara? Everything, Clara said, walking toward the center pedestal. It's the story of my son, Vincent, the son I was told to forget. David, realizing the magnitude of the story, finally nodded, his eyes wide. All right, this is going to be chaos, but it will certainly get attention. He pulled out his phone, already dialing. I'll call the Seattle Times arts editor first. They love drama. We worked quickly, setting up the large blue and gold canvas. I placed the adoption decree and a stack of letters on a small table beside the painting, illuminated by a focused spotlight. The blue bird, soaring on the canvas, seemed to glow, a beacon of truth. It's ready, I said, stepping back. Clara took my hand, squeezing it tightly. Thank you, Vincent, for fighting for this. We're not done fighting, I reminded her, glancing out the window. The black SUV and the dark sedan had just pulled up across the street. The two men from the studio, now joined by a third, larger man, were getting out of the vehicles. They saw us through the glass, standing beside the illuminated painting. They're here, I whispered. They're going to try to stop us. Let them try, Clara said, her voice ringing with defiance. David, are the journalists on their way? 5 minutes, Clara. The editor is sending a camera crew. We had 5 minutes. The three men crossed the street, walking with purpose toward the gallery entrance. They didn't look like they planned on asking nicely. Vincent, stand near the documents, Clara instructed. If they try to grab them, make a scene. I'll handle the distraction. The gallery door burst open. The three men strode in, their dark suits and menacing presence jarring against the pristine white walls and colorful art. Vincent Winters, you are coming with us, the leader stated, his voice low and threatening. And you will hand over those documents now. I don't think so, I said, standing firm, my hand resting on the table beside the adoption decree. You have no authority here. And soon, the whole city will know why you're here. The leader took another step. Before he could reach me, Clara stepped forward, placing herself directly between the men and the painting. Stop, she commanded, her voice surprisingly loud, echoing in the high-ceilinged space. You are trespassing in a private art gallery, and you are about to become a public spectacle. The leader paused, looking at Clara with contempt. Move aside, lady. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me entirely, Clara retorted, her gaze unwavering. I am Clara Vance, and Vincent is my son. The men exchanged a look of surprise. They hadn't expected the biological mother to be present or to be so defiant. Just then, the sound of sirens, faint but growing louder, pierced the air. Not police sirens, but the distinctive wail of emergency vehicles, or perhaps the sound of a fast-moving news van. The leader visibly tensed. He knew he was running out of time. He lunged past Clara, directly toward me and the table. I was ready. I grabbed the heavy wooden pedestal supporting the painting and shoved it hard into the man's path. He stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the canvas. Don't touch the art, Clara screamed, a genuine cry of artistic outrage. The man recovered quickly, his eyes fixed on the documents. I knew I couldn't fight all three of them. I had to make the documents impossible to steal. I grabbed the manila envelope and the letters, holding them high above my head. If you take one step closer, I will tear these to shreds. I warned, my voice shaking with adrenaline. And then Eleanor will have nothing but my word against hers. The men hesitated. They needed the proof intact. They needed to erase the history, not just silence me. The front door of the gallery swung open again, and this time it wasn't Eleanor's thugs. A camera crew, lights blazing, rushed in, followed by a woman with a notepad, the arts editor from the Seattle Times. "Clara Vance? What is the urgent story?" The editor demanded, the camera immediately focusing on the scene, the three menacing men, the distraught artist, and me, holding the documents like a trophy. Clara seized the moment. She stepped into the camera light, pointing dramatically at the painting, the Unflown. "The story," Clara announced, her voice ringing with emotion, "is about the cruelty of a woman who stole my son 43 years ago. It's about the lies that built a life and the truth that will tear it down. These men were sent by Eleanor Winters to silence us and destroy the proof of her deception, the original adoption decree, and the letters I wrote to my son Vincent, who stands here today." The camera swung to me. I lowered the document slightly, allowing the lens to capture the official seal of the decree. The leader of the thugs knew they were finished. They were caught on camera in a public place, attempting to intimidate a renowned artist and her son. The risk of exposure was too high. "We're leaving," the leader growled, turning to his men. "We'll handle this another way." They retreated quickly, melting back out the door and into the black SUV, which sped away into the Seattle traffic. The editor, realizing she had stumbled onto a massive story, not just art, but high-stakes family drama, was ecstatic. "Vincent, tell me everything. Who is Eleanor Winters? What exactly does that decree say?" Clara and I spent the next hour giving a detailed, emotional account, the camera rolling, the editor furiously scribbling notes. We showed the letters, detailing Eleanor's broken promises and Ilara's desperate attempts to preserve the truth. We told the story of the bluebird. The moment the interview ended, I knew I had to call Eleanor. The truth was out, but the final confrontation had to happen face-to-face on my terms. I stepped outside, the cool Seattle air a welcome contrast to the heat of the gallery lights. I dialed her number. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight, strained. "Vincent, where are you? What is happening?" Those men called me hysterical. "What did you tell them?" "I'm in Seattle, Eleanor," I said, my voice calm and firm. And I told them the truth. "I found Clara. I have the decree. I know everything." A long, agonizing silence stretched across the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was a low, venomous hiss. "You little fool. You think a piece of paper changes anything? I raised you. I paid for you. You are mine. And you will always be a mistake." The familiar insult, but now it landed differently. It wasn't a statement of fact. It was a confession of her own failure. "No, Eleanor," I corrected, my voice unwavering. "I am not a mistake. I am the truth you tried to bury. And now the world is going to know about it. The Seattle Times is running a front-page story tomorrow, complete with photos of the adoption decree. Your carefully constructed life is over." I heard a sharp, choked gasp on the other end, followed by the sound of something shattering, likely a glass against a wall. "You wouldn't dare," she whispered, the fear now absolute, pure. "I already did. I'm not coming home, Eleanor. I'm staying here with my mother. You can call your lawyers, you can call your thugs, but you can't stop the truth." I hung up, feeling a profound sense of release. The fight was over. The lie had been dismantled. I walked back into the gallery, where Clara was already talking to David about the logistics of the press conference they would hold the next day. "She knows," I told Clara. "She's broken. Clara nodded, her expression softening. It's sad, Vincent, but necessary. She chose her path. The next morning, the story exploded. Stolen son. Artist Clara Vance reunites with 43-year-old child after decades of deception. The article was brutal, detailing Eleanor Winter's calculated cruelty, using quotes from Alara's letters and the specific details from the adoption decree. The photo of me standing beside Clara in the painting was front-page news. The fallout was immediate. Eleanor called 10 times, leaving increasingly desperate, then vicious voicemails. Her social circle, built on the illusion of her perfect, long-suffering motherhood, began to crumble. Her husband, my adoptive father Robert, a man who had always been passively complicit in Eleanor's schemes, called me, sounding utterly defeated. Vincent, hi? I knew about the adoption, of course, Robert confessed, his voice heavy with shame. But I didn't know she cut off Clara entirely. I'm so sorry. Robert confessed, his voice heavy with shame. But I didn't know she cut off Clara entirely. I'm so sorry. I should have stopped her. You should have, I agreed, the bitterness sharp. But you didn't. You chose silence over truth, Robert. And now you have to live with that. I didn't forgive him, not yet. Forgiveness was a long road, and I was still at the beginning of my journey. 3 weeks later, the retrospective opened. It was a massive success, not just for the art, but for the story. The Unflown became a symbol of resilience and the power of truth. Clara and I stood side by side, greeting guests, the connection between us undeniable. I had found not just a mother, but a sense of belonging I had craved my entire life. A week after the opening, I received a final, strange communication. A plain white envelope hand-delivered to the gallery. It was from Eleanor. I opened it slowly. It wasn't a letter of apology or even a threat. It was a single, brittle, yellowed piece of paper. A note written in a childish hand, dated 40 years ago. Asterisk, dear Mommy, I love you very much. I hope I can be a good boy today. Love, Vincent. It was a note I had written to her in kindergarten, a desperate plea for approval. Eleanor had kept it, tucked away, a relic of a relationship built on a lie, yet rooted in a child's genuine need for love. On the back, Eleanor had scribbled a single sentence in her elegant, familiar script. Asterisk, I did love you, Vincent, but I couldn't love the truth. It wasn't absolution, but it was the closest thing to an admission of vulnerability I would ever get from her. Her cruelty stemmed from her own profound, unhealed wound. She hadn't just stolen a child. She had tried to steal a narrative, and in doing so, she had destroyed her own capacity for genuine connection. I folded the note, placing it in my wallet. It was a reminder of the complexity of human pain and the cost of deception. I stayed in Seattle, finding work easily. I was an electrician, practical and reliable, but now I was also Vincent Vance, the son of an artist, a man who knew his own history. Clara and I spent our days together, sometimes working in the studio, sometimes just talking. She was teaching me to see the world in color, not just in circuits and wires. One evening, sitting in Clara's studio, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues, I felt a deep, profound peace. I was no longer the mistake my mother called me. I was the brave boy Alara had believed in, the son Clara had never forgotten. I looked at Clara, who was sketching quietly. I'm going to change my last name, I said. Legally. To Vance. Clara looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I would like that very much, Vincent. I was 43, and my life was finally beginning. The lie was exposed, the truth was found, and the journey toward healing had begun. I was Vincent Vance, and I finally belonged. The cedar trunk, the metallic smell of the attic, The cruel words of Eleanor, they were all part of the past, a history I now understood, but no longer defined me. The future was bright, open, and filled with the vibrant, unflown possibility of a blue bird finally taking flight.